Good evening. 3 reviews in one day. That's because I've been to see 2 films today and saw 1 film yesterday. I'm not going to lie, I just came out of the second film of today and nearly walked into a third and then thought, do you know what, that's too much even for you. So having already discussed Doolittle and the personal history of David Copperfield, my final review for this weekend is A Beautiful Day in the Neighbourhood. Now, I just messaged a friend about this and she replied with, is that the Tom Hanks one? Yes, it is the Tom Hanks one. Now, for those of you who don't know, which will probably be most of you watching, Tom Hanks is playing a real character called Mr. Rogers, a real person, called Mr. Rogers, who used to be a children's television presenter in the States. Now, in America, he is an absolute institution, a hero, a legend. Everybody grew up with him because his TV show was on from the late 60s, early 70s, right through until 2003. So yeah, a huge chunk of American children from all different backgrounds grew up with Mr. Rogers. And his show was very sweet, very simple. He invited you into his home and talked about stuff that might be bothering children. And he did it in such a way, and the way the whole thing was designed with him looking straight down the camera was so the child watching, or the children watching, would feel that Mr. Rogers was talking directly to them. So that's who he was. He actually passed away in... No, sorry, the show ran until 2001. I think he passed away in 2003. But I had never heard of Mr. Rogers until this film came out. And then reading a bit about it, listening to reviews of it, or listening to the Five Live pod, I kind of got a bit of an understanding of who he is. But what I need to say first and foremost, if you're thinking about going to see this film because you've seen a trailer or you like Tom Hanks or whatever, you do not need to know anything about Mr. Rogers going into this, because everything you need to know is explained. So Mr. Rogers is doing his thing. The film is set in 1998, and a magazine journalist who works for Esquire magazine in New York, a gentleman called Lloyd Vogel, is told by his editor that he has to do 400 words on Mr. Rogers. Not an expose, not a, not digging deep into the backstory of Mr. Rogers, but just the issue is on heroes and she wants 400 words next to a nice picture, job done. But it's not that straightforward. Lloyd Vogel is played by Matthew Rhys, and I sat there looking at him thinking, I'm sure you're a British actor, and I've just looked him up in my car in the dark and gone, I knew he was Welsh. I mean, I didn't know he was Welsh, but his surname's Rhys, so there was a good shot he might be. So he plays Lloyd Vogel. Lloyd has recently become a father. He has a little baby called Gavin with his beautiful wife Andrea, and he's adjusting to life as a new dad at the same time as kind of trying to come to terms with his relationship with his own dad, who's played here brilliantly by Chris Cooper. So the themes are about family, about talking about what's bothering you, about not holding grudges. It's about being kind. So it isn't really about Mr. Rogers, and the article he ends up writing isn't really about Mr. Rogers. It's about all those other things that I just mentioned. So yeah, it's there's someone walking past my car just coughing along up. Nice. Yeah, it's about all of those things. And Tom Hanks, I mean, we bandy around the word legend, don't we? But when it comes to acting, I think it's fair to say that Tom Hanks is an acting legend, and he is so perfect for this part. Now, fair enough, I've never seen footage of the real Mr. Rogers, but there's just, there is a kindness to Tom Hanks. It's why he is so beloved. When you first see him as Mr. Rogers, because the film does start like an episode of the programme would, you feel exactly like Lloyd Vogel feels when he meets him, that this is a character. That Fred Rogers, the man who's married and has 2 grown-up sons and who, lives his life, and Mr. Rogers on the telly are separate. And what becomes apparent over the course of the film is that that's not the case. Like, He's a really, 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 really good guy. He's not perfect, his wife says that, but he is kind, and he believes in kindness and in listening to people and in helping children to understand what they might be going through in a way that kind of only he could. And it's really quite a lovely thing. You know, there's a point where Lloyd says to him, you know, on your programme you've talked about death and you've talked about divorce and you've talked about war, and it's a kids show and this is all really heavy stuff, but the way in which it's handled makes it accessible to children. And unfortunately, the world we live in, and this is, like I say, this was set in 1998, but the world we live in, children are going to encounter these things, whether we want them to or not. You know, I'm separated from my children's dad, and I'm a child of divorce. I've lived through a war. The Gulf War happened within my lifetime. We're permanently poised on the brink of another world war because of the absolute moron that's in charge of America. So these are things that children are dealing with. And Mr. Rogers just gave them a way and a safe place to sort of explore those things. And I'm kind of finding myself wishing now that I had grown up with Mr. Rogers. I find it very moving. It's not too schmaltzy or mawkish. It's just a really well crafted film. The performances are superb. Tom Hanks particularly, but Matthew Rhys as well. The actress who plays his wife Andrea was very good. Chris Cooper, always superb. And it's just a very charming, very gentle, really, like I say, a really well crafted film. I enjoyed it immensely. I'm really glad I've seen it. And if it wasn't for listening to Mark Kermode and Simon Mayo, I might not have done. But they urged their listeners to, you know, it doesn't matter that you don't know who Mr. Rogers is, just go and see the film anyway. And I'm really, really glad I did, because it's been a lovely end to my weekend of films. So hopefully I'll manage to squeeze one in this week at some point. But I've really enjoyed just going to see a few things this weekend and really pummeling the old Limitless Pass, because I like to get my money's worth. So I think now I will have seen either 9 or 10 films so far this year, and it is the 9th of February, so I think it's fair to say I've now seen more films already this year than most normal people will see at the cinema in a year. So winning! Definitely see A Beautiful Day in the Neighbourhood if you get the chance. It's a gorgeous little film. Okay, I'm going inside now. Katie out.